Hello, Aqua friends. I'm so glad you're joining me today. My name's Nicole, and welcome to my channel. I have a fun nighttime scene that I'm going to walk you guys through today. And I'm going to go through this step by step so that you can have a successful painting. We will be working on some various techniques, wet on wet, and when you should be adding in your colors to get different effects. We're going to be creating stars by splattering some paint. And for the mid-ground landscape, we'll be painting that wet on dry. And I'm going to tell you what brushes that you could use to get some realistic looking trees and grasses. We will be talking about timing your paint with the level of the dampness in your paper. The consistency of your paint also plays an important factor. And lastly, we will be going over some dry brushing for the foreground grasses. But before we get into that, if you want to improve your watercolor skills and save time in the learning process, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. I literally post videos on tips and tutorials every week. So I'm starting with the sky, and you want to wet the area where the sky is really well. I'm using cadmium yellow to get that really brilliant sunset. I'm using manganese blue, and I'm going just above that yellow. So leaving a little bit of white space between the two colors, because we're going to tilt our paper and everything's going to blend nicely together. As we go up the paper, we're going to get darker with our colors, and I'm adding some Peruvian blue in there. So we're tilting our paper, and we're just going to let gravity do its job. You do want to wipe up the excess water along the edges of your painting so that you don't get any blooms. So I'm mixing my ochre pink with my blue. Same blue that I used. Now I'm going to test the waters. I'm wiping off some of that pigment, some of the dampness that's on my brush on a piece of paper towel. I'm doing that because I don't want to create a bloom because our paper is starting to dry. So I decided to lift some paint so that my colors show up a little bit better. So using a paper towel, I'm just lifting off some of that blue, and then I'll be able to drop in some more purples and pinks in those areas. So to prevent a bloom, the consistency of your paint must match the dampness of your paper. Let me repeat that. If you don't want any blooms, the amount of moisture you have in your brush has to match the amount of moisture in your paper. So it's always good to be more on the drier side with your brush. And I did that by testing the waters. Wipe it off, and then you can see if it makes a difference on your paper. If there's no difference, then you can add a little bit more paint, and it's better to be cautious than to have too much water in your brush and you wrecked that nice smooth background that we just worked so hard on getting. And I would even suggest practicing this on a scrap piece of paper and make blooms on purpose so that you can see how much water you do have in your brush that will actually make a bloom. So this is the fun part where we get to splatter paint. So my favorite thing to use to splatter paint is a fan brush. And when you think about it, the bristles are already spread out a lot. And so you have this distribution of paint along a greater surface area. And just tapping it against your finger will produce these perfectly variegated drops of paint to make stars. So if you do have a fan brush, give it a go. I absolutely love using fan brushes for spattering. I find that it gives you really good realistic results. So I'm coming in, wetting the bottom part where the lake is, and starting off with my lightest manganese color, increasing that saturation with the phthalo blue, and adding in some of the pink. So I decided to use some pink on my fan brush to get the little pops of color of the pink and the white from the stars into that reflection, and that worked out really good. Now for the landmass, I'm using neutral tint, and I like to mix my neutral tint with a little bit of sepia. And I'm just working wet on dry, but where the water meets the landmass, they're fusing together into a very nice soft line, and I did want that. I didn't want hard edges there. I do have some shrubs that I will be drawing in reflections of. Now let's talk about brushes. I love to use a calligraphy brush. Um, they're very cheap. They're natural bristles, and you can manipulate the natural bristles with your fingers and spread out the bristles so that you get some really cool dry brush and foliage effects. Like you see there how my bristles are fanned out a little bit, and also using a drier consistency of paint will produce a dry brush effect. So we're going to dry that painting before we put on our next layer. So we need the value of the landmass to be darker because it's more of a silhouette. And I didn't want to make blooms, so I wanted to make sure the landmass was really good and dry. So I'm going back in with my same colors of sepia and neutral tint. And I'm getting in all of those trees and brushes using that calligraphy brush. You could also use a round brush. I'm using a round 6 for some areas of this painting. So for the foreground brushes, that area is completely dry. So when we take our calligraphy brush and we have the bristles all fanned out, then it's going to produce some really cool grasses. I also love to use a script liner brush. I'm going in for some of those finer details of grasses and adding in that with a script liner brush. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next week.